Can I get a second?
I will second it.
Okay.
I will second it.
Thank you so much. The mute button's always getting all of us. So just to establish, it is 7:06 p.m. and we are starting our Housing and Human Services Committee meeting for Thursday, June 3rd. Hi, Marshall.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Going well. So just to start us off, just for also our record keeping, I'd like to start with introductions. I'll start with saying my name is Ariel Miranda, the chair for the Housing and Human Services Committee, and I'll pass along to the fellow members.
I'll go next. My name is Angel Vasquez, and I am also a member of the committee, and I reside in the lower end of Washington Heights.
Thank you, Angel.
Bruce Robertson, committee member, Lower Washington Heights, Southern Washington Heights.
Thank you, Bruce.
Hi, everyone. Although I'm just looking now, I think it's just us. But anyway, Marielle Ali here, Assistant Chair for the Housing and Human Services Committee, and also in Southern Washington Heights. Thanks.
All right, I'll jump in here. I'm Marshall Vanderpool. I'm a public member of the Housing and Human Services Committee, and I'm the first vice president of the Dyckman Resident Association.
Thanks, Marshall. And Gladys, will you? Gladys, will you also be announcing? Okay, so I'll just start off with the agenda. So I really put two items for us, and I think it's more so in both review of what we've done this past year, but also what to look forward to really in the coming community board year, as I always say in September. We kind of, I guess, went a bit of a different direction this past year because we were so focused on everything going on as really a result of what was just most current throughout the pandemic. But I wanted to kind of bring back a little bit of material that was being discussed beforehand, which kind of dealt a little bit more with the concerns about what's actually going to happen with the inward rezoning. As many of you might have already seen, actually, Gail also just sent out an invite. She wants to do a walking tour talking about the commitments that have been raised actually for the inward rezoning and what's supposed to be being worked on, which was actually a very great coincidental thing for me. She noted that it's supposed to be, I think it's this coming Wednesday, starting at 4 p.m. The reason why I'm actually saying that that's actually very coincidental for me is because one of the things that I really want to discuss tonight with those two very items, as I've laid out for the agenda, is the individual items that were established within the inward rezoning memorandum of understanding that was actually sent out back in 2018 when the rezoning had passed. This was to serve as to show what exact both capital as well as individual expense items might be coming out from the inward rezoning, and also be investments that would be made throughout really what is Inwood and Washington Heights. And I kind of wanted to review those as well. The individual publicly available resources that's being referred to in the agenda items, which is specific to the HPD website, the DOB website, the Department of City Planning, as well as the NYC checkbook website. Those are all very good resources, I'll say, that will help us in the coming years to try and really understand what we're going to be looking at and how the money is being doled out, whether or not these programs that are being specified within what is the tracker really of the inward rezoning memorandum of understanding, how it's really playing out for us. I'll try and get a little bit more into detail and try and explain it. But for those of you who maybe might be very familiar or even not as as well read about this, I wanted to just take the time right now. So I'm actually just going to share my. Actually, Chanel, would you be able to enable me to share screen? Thank you. Okay, so everyone should be seeing my screen now. If you have not been as familiar here, this is a website that was actually set up through both what is really the efforts of DCP, but also DOITT, and then also the mayor's office. This is kind of where they've been putting together what is really both the kind of the individual projects, but as well the reporting that's supposed to be given on a yearly basis. As you'll read on this page, it's really just laying out what is the requirement right now per a local law that was previously passed back in 2016. I can no longer say recently, but it establishes here that the city is responsible for publishing a list of both capital and programmatic commitments that are associated with neighborhood scale rezonings and an annual progress report that's detailing the status of each initiative. These rezoning commitments are the product of comprehensive and community-driven planning processes in each neighborhood and have also been organized by policy domains, and they kind of break them down into each. What I'll note actually for the committee is that, probably within the coming year, this might be items that would overlap between both Housing and Human Services Committee, as well as many others that are also within the Community Board. And so I thought that it could also be of value to us to try and really bring in a joint meeting that focuses on some of these individual initiatives. When you're clicking into some of the links, I'll just note they haven't been updated, and they try to just make it clear that these were essentially what they say is delayed just due to the COVID-19 pandemic. But when you actually do click into some of the mappings and also the kind of explanation as to what they give, there's just really that very quick explanation again, and just they kind of give a bit more of a general overview of what this website and the tracker is supposed to do. To note, just for our records, it's called the NYC Rezoning Commitments Tracker, and it's focused each tab that you'll see above on each of the rezonings that have been passed.
This is pretty great. I had no idea that this was available to us.
Yeah. So I mean, you can definitely at any time in your leisure go through all of them, but I wanted to just try and focus in on the 2018 Inwood rezoning. Here you'll see they kind of give a brief overview that is. Let's try and move my bar out of the way. There's focused on the Inwood rezoning and tries to explain, what was the reason. Oh, I have no idea why that went back. Okay. So it tries to explain exactly why, the rationale, what the rationale was for the passage of the rezoning at that time, what the focus on the investments of open space, transportation, infrastructure, education. And then as you begin to start scrolling down, actually, it breaks down what is five specific categories there. The first being housing, second, open space, third, community resources, fourth, transportation and infrastructure, and then the fifth, which is I think something that's going to be very, very important in this coming year, is economic and workforce development. And again, this is why I just say that there's perhaps the ability to have overlap between committees. It is definitely something I hope we'll be able to advance in the future. Just kind of going straight into what is the housing portion, they are really just laying out a number of their own individual focal points, such as advancing affordable housing development on publicly owned land. What you might notice is that they're directly talking about the Inwood Library. If some of you have already passed by, you've noticed that the the demolition already began, and so now we're going to be waiting for some time to see when the Eliza, the project that's been proposed to take over that very same space, will come to fruition. It's noting here that it's already been focused more so on trying to bring forward a modern library branch, bringing forward the number of units that was discussed during the HPD presentation. If you have not seen it, please do look into the recordings. We have a very specific breakdown as to what the income ranges might be for that very project, as well as what units might be going towards specific bands for incomes. It's also making note of the universal pre-K classrooms. I'll just note here, originally, I think during that conversation we had with what was EDC at that time coming to our committee, they did discuss that this was supposed to be about roughly 3 pre-K classrooms. There has not been an updated, I guess, relay of information as to what the space might actually look like. But that was at the time when they were discussing the passage of the rezoning. And then, yes, there's also a discussion about community facility space. What that might look like is something that I have not personally heard as much about, but it's definitely something that maybe might be asked about with our land use partners, actually, because the last meeting that was had about the LISA project was actually with Wayne Benjamin. And again, this is something that we can possibly bring up with him as well in the coming year. One of the sites that they do mention off the bat is specifically the Dyckman houses. As you might have already as well heard, one of the spaces that is being looked at a lot within this administration is publicly owned land to essentially develop even more housing on top of. There's been a lot of just different ideas that have come about depending on the project, but essentially it is that it would potentially be private, and then some units would go within some of those developments to then what is considered NYCHA. And this is, again, not something that's going to be as clear, although they do make note in this little paragraph here that they're supposed to be expecting approximately 180 to 250 units of 100% affordable housing. I think what will also be very consequential for us as a committee is to understand what the income bands might look like for those 180 and 250 units. As some of you might have seen in the past conversation that we had about the income bands, they're not necessarily going to meet some of the standards or the needs that we might have in the community. And so it's really important for us to ask about this, perhaps in the next chance we have a meeting with NYCHA as well. Quite frankly, I was not as familiar with this individual focus of 180 to 250 units, but I did want to just raise that. And Marshall, if you happen to have heard anything, please feel free to just jump in here, because I would love to hear from you as well.
Well, just to jump in real quick, it's doubtful how this is going to be done. I mean, my understanding is that this is at stalemate right now, at best. And as a comment, I don't see how how appealing this building would be when you've got 7 buildings surrounded with scaffolding and such, and all you're missing is the razor wire that makes it look like some sort of residential facility. So I'll land my plane here. I mean, there still seems to be questions as far as whether this aspect or this blurb is accurate.
Yeah, and again, this is something that I barely have heard anything about, and that's actually one of the reasons why, again, I also wanted to put forward this website here, because it does already give us more information than perhaps we all might have been exposed to at this point. One of the other just items I'll mention as well that perhaps even the Manhattan Borough president might go over in her walking tour is actually the discussion about the DOT, or rather Con Edison's properties that are supposed to be being shared with us per a contract negotiation that happened years back. There's a lot of things going on within the spaces, as you'll see on the mapping here. Let me just click this out. So essentially within this area, you have both the Con Edison properties as well as what is the DOT facilities right in this area here, all along here. Although I should mention that this is kind of looking, yeah, you're kind of looking at some spaces that have been essentially rezoned for upzoning, really higher buildings. And so it's kind of a question as to what will also be taking place throughout this period. I'm sorry, this is going to be a build out, actually, sorry, of 206th Street on the west side.
That's where the Pathmark used to be? No? Or am I confusing it?
Yeah, because you're looking at like around here,
Right.
and yeah, that was bought up, and I do believe that was also part of I think it's Madruga's companies.
Yeah.
Going to be redeveloping that area too. But yeah, I'm not sure if maybe it was supposed to be the bridge on 206. I think maybe they're trying to talk about 207 there.
Okay.
But that's also something we gotta probably ask a little bit more about. Yeah, they're also talking about going to Fordham Road there. So yeah, these are individual projects that have been looked at by the city. There's definitely quite a bit of information that I know for sure I'm lacking on. And then 4095 9th Avenue, that's not necessarily something that we've, I think, discussed with the city, but it's quite impressive that they've already come up to that number of units, 570, that are essentially planned for that site. So I'd be very interested to know what will happen once it takes, once it comes to fruition there. Just moving on to its next item here, it's talking about the exploration of additional potential opportunities for affordable housing on public land. Yes, DSNY's building, it is, it's been there for decades, and it's taken on quite a few different purposes throughout the years. It is in close proximity to areas that we know were sites for potential, what was considered spot rezoning by CB12, that was essentially running alongside this portion here before. We haven't necessarily heard as much about this project that they're looking at, but yeah, it's an area in which they could potentially develop something along that line. And I can probably see if I can, yeah.
Ariel, quick question. Is this the oh, okay. By you zooming in, I think it answered my question. I was going to say, is that by the that's the bus stop where the Home Depot is a whole bunch of buses there, right?
So
or am I thinking something else?
Yeah,
No,
so
I think I'm thinking something else.
So there's this space here, which I think is actually supposed to be what is the track that was set up right behind IS-52. GSNY's building here.
Okay.
Oh yeah, yes, there we go. I was wondering why I was focusing there.
I was
Yeah,
thinking of 218. That's what it is.
over here. And if you ever gotten off on 215th,
Mhm.
within, I would say, like the past 3 months, they have been doing what it looks like to be speed tests. If folks have not had to deal with the situation of trying to get to the SNAP centers around there in the mornings, or quite frankly, throughout the entire day, there's a lot of cars that are constantly running by. And what is also another issue to probably raise more so with traffic and transportation is that a lot of the workers actually, they park their cars in places that are not technically supposed to be parking. And it'll be alongside the sidewalks and in the middle, kind of the middle of the streets there. And yeah, there's just constant cars that are zooming by. So this might be a concern about both the width of the sidewalks for parking, if they are supposed to be having that there, as well as even a traffic study, because I can only imagine that developing so much housing at that very site could also lead to more concerns about congestion. And sorry, did anyone have any additional thoughts on these individual items? Please feel free to also jump in, because I unfortunately, in shared screen mode, I can't see anyone raising their hands. Okay.
Well, I don't know, as a thought though, as far as housing at that location that you just described, I mean, the bus depot is right there. I mean, what kind of effect would that be on people's health as far as having housing right on top of that bus depot? I mean,
And the buses, I mean, I run through there. I probably shouldn't for my own lungs, but they leave them just in standing and
That
are
look crazy.
they're constantly just running throughout the day. So it's definitely something of it, also air conditioned. Yes, Bruce. Sorry.
I'm muted. Okay, so while we're here, where is the Bowery Homeless Center supposed to be going?
Oh, good question. So let me just try and zoom it. So it's
So they're in the mix of this whole thing
yes. So
with
when you get off,
with the slave cemetery,
The graveyard.
graveyard. Excuse me, graveyard.
so when you get off of the A train on 211th there, if you walk past the school towards this portion here where they've just finished the establishing the rezoning code for that lot, that was what they were also mentioning. It's going to be right in this area here.
207,
Well, off of 211th,
211.
to
Okay.
212 there. Yeah. So it's right into the purple area, which was kind of what we were mentioning before. Why they stopped their construction, because they wanted to figure out what the density could be for that site. And
Right.
since now they've been able to establish that, they'll be able to build up fairly high.
So they're going to be in that purple block.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, in between 211 and 212 there. And actually, just to, I guess, mention it now, it's interesting that when you look at how they've really cited that purple area there, I did not mean to do that. They noted that this area is supposed to be allowing for moderate density development with the purpose of housing, retail, businesses, and community facilities.
Right.
Not to try and swipe at the project, but if this was the purpose originally to try and upzone it so as to allow for a shelter, I'm not necessarily certain that the shelter would be falling in line with the original purposes of that rezoned area there. So it's just something that we also need to try and think about when we're talking to our city officials coming to speak to us about these projects, right? What are they doing with the upzoning areas? Because if we are asking specifically for housing and retail businesses, as we've also discussed, we know that through a local law, there's 15% of housing that's supposed to be given in new affordable housing to specifically individuals experiencing homelessness. What is the reasoning for having put the shelter in that space there? So I think this is just something, again, to just think about. Again, not a specific question for BRC, but more so for the officials when they come to speak to us about these spaces here being rezoned. Just moving back on down. The third focus that they put here is as well advancing preservation projects in city-owned buildings. They threw out a number of programs to us back in 2018, some of which had not even been incorporated before or tested out. They decided to use really what is going to be programs that go through both CLOF as well as MIMIC to essentially serve as guinea pigs for a lot of the other rezoning areas, as well as other other programs that could be implemented wide in the future. As you'll see, they'll mention the usage of what would be like a cooperative program that would be established here as the Affordable Neighborhood Cooperative Program. And then it's also to be focused on tenant and term leases. So trying to get them away from being in those very spotty third-party situations that a lot of times people don't like. This is, of course, great if it works out well, where families can afford to essentially own these potential cooperatives and not be forced out by very high rents, which is another matter that has come about before when we look at tenant and term leases. So it's just, again, another matter that's very important for us. I think that when we've heard about a lot of the rezoning projects, they're going to be focused on the golden number of 5,000 affordable housing units, but that is with the purpose of renting, not opportunities for homeowners. And so, when we talk about 2110 Amsterdam and 21 Arden Street, right? These have been, I'm sorry, 2185 as well, Amsterdam. These have been individual buildings that we've been looking at for years because they unfortunately were just left to be dilapidated and also fall into disrepair. And unfortunately, to the circumstance that families had to be forced out of their homes. It's great that, partnering with NIMIC and Cloth, I believe it's at 21 Arden Street or 2185. It's one of those two buildings. Families have really been able to buy into their homes. The hope is to try and keep them there. And right, so these are again just programs that have kind of somewhat tipped off, but not necessarily that wide within Inwood. And so it's something that I also want to follow up in the future about. Again, this is one of the programs that was also discussed in 2018. It is not something specific to Inwood alone. It's actually based in Washington Heights. Just to also make sure that folks are familiar, it is on essentially 181st. And you're looking at probably between, once you pass Audubon off St. Nicholas, you're getting off the 1 train pretty much. You'll see it there. We spoke to actually SUS a few months back. We had them invited to the panel that we did with the Youth and Education Committee. As they said, they've been expecting that there is supposed to be a large number of families who are supposed to be evicted, who are going to potentially become homeless really after the eviction moratorium has ended. And a lot of the protections that have been offered throughout the pandemic are also non-existent in the future. And so this is also one of the services that will be very much so responsible for aiding a lot of the families, potentially sending them as well to the PAF Center. As I might have mentioned when we had that panel, the PAF Center that is typically offered for a lot of families, and you're talking about, young children, is going to be in the Bronx area off over here. And that's typically where the intake process will take place. If that is the case, then we're losing a number of residents who will be forced to either enter shelter. Maybe it might be at the BRC shelter that will come about. Maybe it might be really spread across the entire city. The focus has been thus far by DSS to keep people in the communities. And maybe this might be very well one of the reasons why they want to have the shelter in Inwood. But there's, again, the very strong possibility that families will be moved out of the community and not able to even take shelter within Washington Heights and Inwood.
What does SUS stand for again?
It's Services for the Underserved.
Okay. And one thing, I think it's actually highlighted in purple that I found, well, it's not housing related, which is probably the reason why we're not talking about it. And something that came to mind was some of the renovation work that was supposed to happen at George Washington High School, but that is youth and education. So let me not derail your meeting. Sorry.
Oh, no. So yeah, and it's again just good in general to discuss all of it because at least you can bring this back to other committees too.
Yeah.
Okay. So and just moving on down. So this is kind of one of the things I think that Housing and Human Services was a bit critical of. It's essentially the establishment of what is the Neighborhood Pillars program. Really, the city is going to be looking for landlords who can prove they have not been engaging in a harassing manner with tenants, whether it be outside of this community, across the city of New York, with various other properties that they might have been in owning and also maintaining, right? And when the rezoning passed, this had never been tested. It was never piloted. And so we have a bit of questions about that as well. As you're seeing, it was supposed to be taking effect in fall 2019. I have not heard as much about it. I think this is also one of the concerns that was raised, and we definitely want to hear a little bit more about how it's been really taking effect right now. Is there any questions about the Neighborhood Pillars program that maybe just come to mind? Maybe I might not know, but just that you're thinking of now? Oh, and I guess I should just mention this here. It's not part of, as I understood when it passed in 2018, the neighborhood alerts program, but this is essentially, yes, down payment assistance funds. Definitely an important, I guess you could say, an undertaking by HPD in general. One of the reasons why that you find there's also low home ownership opportunities is because people cannot simply just make the down payment. And so this is really what helps a lot of low-income families. This has also been cited by not this individual program, but just in general, the policy that takes place to put down down payment. It's been cited by the Low-Income Housing Coalition as a very great motivator for trying to get low-income families into home ownership opportunities. Um, so yeah, definitely something I'd love to hear more about. If Ada was here, I think this was one of the things that she'd also been poking about and trying to hear a little bit more for the coming year. I'll definitely make sure to share as well with her. And then this is our 6th point here. It's focusing on including Washington Heights, Inwood, Marble Hill, and what are the partners of preservation. Really looking at who have been good actors thus far and trying to see how they can support buildings that they've been maybe struggling to maintain, and offering further support from HPD and really what would be even DOB. And one of the individual actors would be Northern Manhattan Improvement Corporation. They're also receiving some grant money. And as you'll see, yes, it's also going to be in partnership with the Housing Development Corporation and Enterprise Community Partners. And yes, so this is actually the the project I was discussing before about the Con Edison project. So they have been focused on trying to consolidate the space that they've been using. As you might have seen right beside what is PS 218, there are a huge number of what are red buildings that are Con Edison owned, and also parking lots that they fill up with their trucks, their individual vehicles that they use to go to site visits. And so those are supposed to be also being moved within, let's see what they give the timeline this year. But again, this is from 2018, so this might be outdated. They may very well be taking a little bit longer as a result of the COVID pandemic. So this is also something that we should be following up on in the future. And yeah, this is really more so speaking to working with individual groups, trying to find out ways to better support tenants, but also even finding owners. And you can read a little bit more about this. We're not as familiar. They have done a faith-based project in the past along, I think it was Mount Hope, going past the Dyckman 1 train station. It's about 2 blocks off. And that's really the only faith-based project that I've seen take place. But apparently they're saying that there has been about 17. So it'd be great to find out where the 16 others are.
Ariel?
Yeah.
So this doesn't seem to be very current, this information. How do we track all these projects? Huh? Is there somebody, some entity that's tracking these on an ongoing basis other than this website, which seems to be outdated?
Yeah, so this is fully the responsibility of the mayor's office of operations. And so at a I think a future point, we definitely would like to get the you know, a more updated response here. So this one is technically, I think it's from June of I want to say 2018, or no, June of 2020, I think was the last time it updated. And again, it was more so because there was a lot of like stalling on projects, and they're saying that it's due to the pandemic.
Can we get on a mailing list, or can you get on a mailing list for all this stuff?
Yeah, I'd have to look into it, but let me try and see who we can contact from them, and then maybe they can bring in partners as well from HPD and HDC to see what we can learn a little bit more about this, because yes, this is mainly going through them.
A lot of moving parts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bruce,
But-
that was a great question. I mean, I could easily see that being, a future meeting, reach out to them and, kind of bring in, as Ariel mentioned, the relevant partners and kind of just going through this and getting updates on where things are at and working with the various other committees where, there's some intersection and how we can make sure these, things are being done as they are laid out to be done and making sure everyone's being held accountable.
Mhm.
Thank you.
So clearly, I mean, there is a lot of work that's going to take place. The list kind of just continues to go down a bit more. I don't want to continue to run through each individual one here, but these are some of the individual, again, projects that were said to be taking place. The timelines have clearly shifted, right? And we're kind of just seeing that as we keep going through the individual items. There's so much work to be done, and I just wanted to make sure that you all also have this information in front of you, or you know where to find it. If you literally just type in like NYC Inwood Rezoning Tracker, it'll be the first link that comes up right on Google. But I'll of course be sharing this link as well as links to every one of the websites we'll be discussing tonight. I just want to make sure that you're also familiar with this. And again, there's there's a lot of individual items that we have to go over. But I want you to just have the brief overview. What I think would just be helpful for me right now, and I guess for the committee as well, is to just point out that what we're really focused more so on is the projects that are going to be highlighted in purple, right? Because that's what we understood from the rezoning was supposed to be where the most upzoning is going to be happening. We already know that this is right next to what was the library and the car wash, but it's also overlapping what is a ginormous grocery store. One of the concerns that has been raised by the Manhattan Borough President in the past is that we've been losing a lot of community-based grocery stores, and it causes as a result food prices to go up. One of the main concerns that also comes up when we talk about gentrification in communities. And if you've spent some time going through what is that very narrow strip of the businesses here, you're talking about a lot of small, like I would say, like you have some mechanics, you have some great cuchi frito spots, you have some barbershops, and there is both like a bus stop moving along here, as well as what is the Brown Sugar Restaurant. And so really there's a lot of opportunity to develop. What I would also just mention is that I'm not sure what might happen along, it's either this block here or the following, but essentially there is a funeral home that's literally only about 1 story high. And so that could very well be one of the areas that they're looking to also upzone. Some of the buildings are already fairly, about 6 to 7 stories that you'll find along this passageway here. But some of the spaces, yes, you can definitely expect that maybe there would be, a lot of offerings to buy out the current owners of those spaces, like as the funeral home, the individual auto body shops, and so forth. So I think that that's also one of the concerns that we'll find over time. The spaces that you're looking up here, those haven't really been developed for a long time. But there has been projects that have also been cited. One of the things that came up in the 2018 rezoning was specifically creating a tech hub, and that's supposed to be alongside this space. But there's also a focus on trying to expand the New York Presbyterian offices, and I believe at one point they were also talking about parking as well there. So it's just some of the projects that you expect will also be rising up are pretty much going to be going all alongside this here. Lots of lots of review essentially with all of the agencies when we have that opportunity. Okay, so I will leave us here not to just go too into depth with the tracker. Clearly, there's a lot of information I think in the coming year, that's going to be one of the main focuses, to try and review them, try and see how we can ask the agencies about what they're doing with each individual one, what the progress might look like. Because, if the timelines haven't been reached, then they're probably backlogged and they're not necessarily meeting them as they plan to. What I will do first right now is go into HPD Online's website. Some folks have been familiar with it. If you've ever worked with individual clients that come directly into elected offices, or you've worked with the public on trying to help them with their 311 complaints, you've probably seen this quite a few times, too many times. But it's really a helpful source that always is something that's actually very user-friendly once you just get to know it and how to use it. It actually does a really great job of breaking everything down by individual buildings. I'll actually just type in my building. You'll either learn how nice it is or how terrible it is. But it's really just to give you an example of what you might look like when you're using these websites. And again, this is just the HPD online website. You type that straight into Google, you will get the first link that came up there. And I'll, of course, again, share this link with you all. So one of the things that it will automatically do at the very top is show you a breakdown of the units, the stories that are within that building. It'll give you the census tract if you really want that specific data. Maybe you're someone who's doing the research, and you're also getting alternative addresses. Now, the reason why is that within Inwood, I'll say there's probably about a lot of times 5 to 7 different addresses that are being used for the very same building. Partly, some of this has to do with the fact that the city doesn't really do a great job of changing these addresses and updating them on both the city mapping as well as even Department of Buildings. But this has just come up over years. Today, my building actually, if you're trying to get the addresses that you directly live at, you're only going to be seeing 241 and also 251. So all of these over time have just pretty much kept it. They kept the same numbers. When you look over to the sidebar here, this is really what you're going to try and maybe help a lot of tenants that might come forward to the committees, asking about how they can find more information, how they can address these, let's say repair issues that they have in their apartments. You want to refer them always first off to the property owner and registration information. The reason being is that a lot of times they don't know how to connect with their landlords. They don't know who they actually are. A lot of times they'll use LLCs, and it makes it very difficult for, if they ever go to court, to figure out who to serve if they are trying to get repairs. And of course, you can always refer them to Legal Aid Society, and they do this work of course as well. But it's very important for them to also know where they can find this information. For instance, you'll see here the head officer of maybe the organization that owns that building, might be a nonprofit or corporation specifically. Here you'll see here they use the LLC, and they also explain who the managing agent is. Typically, when I have worked with tenants in the past, I try to get them to first contact the managing agent. If not the managing agent, then going directly to who would be the landlord or the owner. In this very instance, you're talking about this being the very same person for the head officer as well as the managing agent. So it could depend, of course, on the tenant situation. When you want to look at complaints, specifically, I'll tell you the complaint history is probably one of the best things to look forward to. You want to see what's happening within each individual apartment. Thankfully, this gives you a breakdown over the years when tenants essentially either will take care of things or won't take care of things. But you see if there's issues that are consistent. For instance, maybe there's issues with their walls. This was filed all on the same date, and this could very well be because maybe they had somebody from the city actually visit them. One of the focuses that I've always also brought up is the tenant support unit being in Inwood right now. They actually will go door to door and take down every single complaint that they've ever had, and they'll log them for them. So that's why for some instances, you'll see that the same apartment will have multiple. And it's thankfully, due to that kind of engagement that you have. But you can also look down the list, and if there's been a recurring issue you've seen in the apartment, let's say I'm just seeing here 23B, not having hot water, you can see there's probably several dates, and it really helps people also find out when there's been issues coming up over time and how consistent maybe no heat or hot water has been in the building. I'll just let you all know, I have been freezing in the past, and it is something that, of course, a lot of fellow tenants will also be complaining about. All open violations, you're really looking at what the landlord has not taken care of, right? This might seem altogether a large number, but there are a lot of reasons for why that is. One of the things that you find is that sometimes tenants don't respond to notifications that they'll get from the city, and it's sometimes just because they will not necessarily know what they're supposed to do. A lot of times HPD will reach out to the tenants directly. They'll send a letter just clarifying that they understood there was a complaint being issued. They're expecting an HPD investigator to come by and inspect. And then at times, what happens is that HPD is supposed to be calling the tenant in advance. Sometimes they will not gain entrance. Sometimes they will have not necessarily even call the tenant, but they are supposed to. And when that happens, this violation, the one that that was being cited before, it stays up. If a tenant doesn't respond within a certain amount of time, or let's say that they requested specifically, the tenant confirms that an issue has continued even after an investor came by. Let me close my window actually. If an investigator came by and did find an issue previously, but the tenant never responded to say like, hey, this got taken care of, or hey, this hasn't gotten taken care of, it might stay up or it might be closed by that investigator. So these are kind of just the very regular occurrences that come up with HPD when they come by and they do those those individual inspections. Other concerns I think that also come up. So what will it mean a lot of times, the class A, class B, class C? So this is more so dealing with how, I guess you could say, dangerous, or how, how I guess toxic an individual situation might be becoming for a tenant, depending on what kind of violation they'll be getting. And here, it'll stay hazardous, for instance. Whether it's A, B, C, it will change how quickly they're requiring that a landlord is really addressing the violation. For instance, you might see abating the infestation of mice. It was issued, well, it was reported on 5/28. The issue date was 6/01, right? They're giving them a month. So it's maybe not that high of a priority, unfortunately, but it should be. And let's see, just want to make sure I'm giving you good examples here. Okay, so usually what will be one of the most hazardous right away is lead paint. Lead paint, lead paint, lead paint. I cannot say how many times I've had that issue come up, but essentially investigators, inspectors, they will ask for this to be typically done. You're talking about a week, 2 weeks max, just because of how detrimental it could be to a lot of children's health. And I'll say, thankfully, my building isn't having this issue as far as I can see right away. But there are a lot of buildings that do still have this, and it's very important that when individual tenants or families that you might know have had this issue, that they're also familiar as to when their landlord is supposed to be taking care of the problem there as well. And so you can always refer them to these individual trackers that are also online. Do you happen to have any questions about this page right here?
Ariel, not a question, but just I guess to share a recent experience with this, where I unfortunately had to file a complaint about my own apartment. And yeah, no, you're exactly right. We were having some issues, and because I have a child at home, there was an inspector here within like 2 days. And what I will say, another thing is, to encourage kind of any community residents that come to also take pictures. So for instance, if there are any instances of like, rodents or mice or holes and things like that, take pictures, because they will then follow up and ask for you to share those pictures with them. And so we had to do that. We had instances of like holes and stuff. And you can imagine the building or the landlord responded quite quickly after I had to call HPD, but they responded. So just, just remembering that if you're talking to residents that are experiencing some of these issues as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also hoping, just like, if either of you are going to various other meetings, even beside the community board, that you can also share this, because sometimes, quite frankly, I don't find that there's enough people that know about this. And I remember when I first started actually using this website so regularly, it was difficult for a lot of tenants to kind of understand their situation and how they were really just capable of using this publicly available resource to stay more in contact and also on top of what might be going on with the agency. 'Cause quite frankly, yes, agencies will sometimes not get back right away. They will not necessarily follow up as soon as they probably should be. And so that's one of the reasons why I also wanted to make sure that the tenants that I would work with also were aware of how to use this. Okay. So this is not going to be as, I think, important. You're talking about prior years violations. But I do think individually, as just when we're looking over what's happening in buildings across the community, especially, given that this past year was, the pandemic, when landlords might have essentially been less incentivized to maybe go out and do things, it's important for us to understand what's happening. I'll even say, for people who are trying to find other apartments throughout the pandemic, I even told my own brother when he was moving to another apartment, I was like, make sure you check this website. Unfortunately, he did not listen to me. I told him, I was like, you got to look at this. Otherwise, you're going to get like all the roaches, you're going to get the mice in the places that you just got a new apartment for. But this is very important. People should be looking at this over time to make sure that they're following up and also aware of where they're going to be, essentially going to. This is more so specific to the lead paste issues. Again, thankfully, my building's not having that issue, but it is also a tab that people can look over. Again, it's the overdue lead paint violation correction page. And it's just to try and understand what the building's status has been like. If they've had paint issues in the past, if, maybe it's within the past year, you might also find that if that's the case, there's probably other apartments in the very same building that have not had lead paint issues corrected in their apartments. And yeah, you can always check your complaint status too, which is actually much more helpful, I'll say, than really 311. 311 doesn't necessarily always update, taking the HPD inspector's notes that are directly input into their system. Sometimes, like, for instance, when you go back to 311 and you try to check on that very same complaint number, you'll still see the note being stating that the agency has sent somebody out and will be responding shortly, and it stays there for a while, right? This is thankfully a little bit better. You can get a response a lot quicker from that inspector or the investigator when they actually enter it into HPD. And yes, you can use either complaint ID number that's logged in the complaint history, or you can use your SR number, really, which is the very same number that's given to you by 311. So it's really just depending on which one you choose there. And yeah, it'll just tell you there, 311. Okay. If you have questions, always feel free to reach out to me. This is just again, another resource that's available for any of the violations or issues that you want to find out about buildings. When it comes to the Department of Buildings website, again, type in Department of Buildings website. You can also do the building information search. This is usually the first link that will pop up right away. You can enter in information about these buildings and really get what is the information. I'm not going to know that. You don't have to know that. Let's see here. Actually, I'll just put. And so here you are. You're going to be given a bit of information about this. Personally, I like to look over this for both information on the zoning of the lot. So, for instance, if you all wanted to go back at this very same moment or after this meeting and check on the property where, for instance, the BRC shelter is going to be. You can see what either might have been cited in the past by the Department of Buildings about this lot, or even the structure. Perhaps even, let's say, if there was a crack in the foundation, that would probably be here. If perhaps, you're looking at buildings that have been really like 200, 300 years old, you might see some violations cited here too, right? And if there's ever, a vacate order for a building, you're definitely, absolutely going to see that coming up in here. What I'll just note is that sometimes, depending on the building, if it is, due to very specific regulations that are put forward by our legislators, by individual other agencies, they might make note of them, kind of like the local law section here. If it is perhaps serving to be as a single room occupancy sort of property, it would also be noted. What I can imagine in the future is, now that we're assessing for really what is upcoming 2050 flood zones, there might potentially be restrictions that could be put in place. This is one of the very focuses now of DEP to try and better assess what regulations might need to be put, let's say specifically, for instance, as they're focusing on right now in the Lower East Side. And this could very well be, something that comes up on our pages here when we're looking at a lot of Washington Heights and Inwood buildings, specifically Inwood, in the future. And yes, you can also just check the complaints that the public might also raise. And you can even see the inspection date. And yeah, if you click on each one of the individual complaint numbers, you get more specific information about them. Yes, that was an issue. Scaffolding was definitely up for 2 years. But yeah, so that's just the kind of information that you would also want to look at in the future. Violations that are cited are also going to be on here. They'll make note of if it's dismissed at some point. Thankfully, it seems like everything for mine has been, except for this one. I'll click on that later. But yes, you can check on those too as well. What I will mention, so OAF is supposed to be essentially the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings. That means that if ever there is a challenge raised by the public about, let's say, the Department of Buildings not issuing a violation, or perhaps deciding to dismiss the violation, and someone really want to fight this with the city, they would typically go to that very Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings, and that's typically where they will make the ultimate decision as to whether or not the agency has either been in the wrong or they have done things correctly. And this is on, I want to say this is on the OAF website. I'm not going to remember exactly where, but this is just one quick, again, area that you can check for what happens with it, with those cases that come forward. Yeah. Also, if you have an elevator in your building, I always just suggest looking at what happened with the Department of Buildings and inspection. They're responsible specifically for checking on all elevators. This happens a lot in Inwood, where a lot of them become defunct because really the landlord doesn't maintain them well. Maybe sometimes, yes, there are older buildings, older elevators that just take on a lot more. But this is very important because it's a common occurrence. It was, at least when I was working with the city on checking a lot of the buildings. But it's just very important for people to know what the actual landlord is doing, and quite frankly, for your own safety. So yeah, is there any additional questions on this before I can switch on over? Yeah, Aisha.
Good evening, everybody. I'm sorry for joining late. My question is in relation, I'm not sure if you may have covered this already. Is the committee aware of the building where there was a collapse of the facade this past week in our district on, I think it was 184th Street?
No, not as familiar with that issue.
So I could try to pull up the exact address. But so there was a building where very large blocks of and what I'll do is I'll send anything that I know about it to you. Very large pieces of the facade of a building fell, broke the banister of the stairway, and hit someone in the head as well. And that person was taken to the hospital. Fortunately, they survived that situation. I'm not sure how hurt they were or what the impact was. I believe the media was supposed to be getting involved the last that I checked. There was conversation about it in the Facebook group, but when I looked into it, I know that HPD had many violations for that building. I believe that they were also listed with the worst landlords, um, and I believe they have other buildings in our district. I don't think that DOB things have been I've had a lot going on, so I didn't get to check into the status of DOB, but I'm told by people that have been in touch with the story that apparently DOB was not responsive to concerns to the building previously, and didn't have violations for the building, which was curious to me, that if HPD had so many violations, how is DOB not? Let me find the address. Maybe it's something that we could look at um, tonight quickly, or I'll try to pull it up myself on my side. But yeah, so that's pretty much what I know about the situation. Someone was hurt. The facade was an issue. The landlord is a landlord in our building, in our district, that has other buildings in and out of our district. So it just brings the concern of what's the state of these other buildings that the landlord may own. But it further rises the concern that I have, where I attempted previously to raise the concern that we are not in touch with things that are happening in our district when they're happening, as well as being able to keep track of the trends that arise in our district. It was for that reason that I was proposing to have a portal that would not only provide us with that specific type of data, but to allow for stakeholders in the district, community members, to do reporting as well. As some of you may know, I had courted Microsoft with the idea that I had to do so. They were very friendly to the idea, and unfortunately, it got swallowed by the chaos with the Armory Foundation matter, where I was targeted and eventually removed from my chairship. But this gives light to why something like this is of real need, not just for our district, but in general, because it's one thing to have access to all the data, but unless we have something that is intelligent design that is basically working these numbers and pushing them out to us on a regular basis, it's difficult to do the work that's necessary and stay in touch with things in the way that we should, especially in 2021. So but I'll take a few minutes while I don't know if you go on or take someone else's question. I'll try to pull up more information.
Yeah.
Ariel?
Mhm.
It's 622 West 184.
Thank you, Bruce.
I can actually just see if DOB has. Hmm. Only 2 open violations. And
Are
these
any of them new?
no, this is from 2014 and 2018.
Which is very concerning. I think that it's something that our board um, needs to find out. What is the status of this? Why is there not a new violation there? Um, I'm assuming that when something like this happens, that there would be an immediate violation.
It's also given a different address, 616, which, whatever that means.
I believe that this may be a building that has two entrances, because when I looked it up, it also gave me a separate address, which is something that's also confusing. I believe that the way that these portals should work is if they have a double address or more than one address, that when you look it up, it's letting you know clearly that that's the dynamic that's happening, because it can be confusing. Or
Yeah.
the other problem that exists is if you're looking up one building, um, that it's not giving light to that the fact that this other address is attached to it, that may be of concern, also.
So these are all things, by the way, for the minutes. We'll also just make note of. Aisha, just so you know, I was mentioning that I wanted to go over these items, and earlier I was going over actually what was the Mayor's Office of Operations website that also has its own tracking system for the commitments it made to us through the inventory zoning. I
Yeah.
think these are all the items that we also want to try and just focus in on in the coming year, because I know that these were of concern prior, but with everything that just happened this past year, we kind of lost I guess the side of all this things going on. And really, there's just so many items that already were due prior, are kind of supposed to be done
Hmm.
already. So it's really just trying to follow up in the coming year for these things that are going on.
I
Uh,
know the borough president mentioned that there was supposed to be a walkthrough in relation to the rezoning. I'm not sure if it passed. I would have to take a look at other notes that I have to see for the date. I believe that it may have been this weekend that she was planning. I think she mentioned it in the general that there would be a walkthrough.
uh,
Um,
she sent an email a little bit earlier. It's just letting us know that essentially they're supposed to be having one on this coming day at 4.
okay. Did it
Yeah,
specify which date exactly?
this coming Wednesday. It's the mm,
Okay, I'll be sure to check for that. In regards to the building that had the collapse, there's a patch article called "Building Facade Collapse in the Heights Sends Person to the ER." If you wanted to look into that. And DOB arrived at the scene, I believe, the next day, according to the person that was consistently posting about it.
that's where it's it. That's odd. Okay, it's not coming up right away on the news, but I will.
If you search for building collapse um, in the Heights, it should come up.
Mm, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and these are kind of the issues that I mean. It's a lot more than this the single incident here with DOB, but yeah, DOB does not do the best job of its inspections or doing.
No. Not to mention that historically, this committee has taken the position that we need more funding for inspectors related to these buildings. That there needs to be more boots on the ground, checking for these violations, and clearly someone said something about local law 11 in regards to the building's responsibility or the landlord's responsibility to secure the facades. But and I'm sure that that's probably true. But at the same time, what is DOB's responsibility in making sure that they are doing that on a regular basis? So
Mhm. Yeah. And that's the thing. It's just like, especially when you have so much aggressive construction work that's also being done in a lot of the buildings, quite frankly, throughout Inwood, Washington Heights, and just many others that are also experiencing this desire for much better housing as a result of really when incomes go up in the neighborhoods. This is a common issue that will come up, where because of the aggressive construction work being done within apartments, it actually creates many issues that result in violations for the Department of Buildings. But oftentimes, the Department of Buildings does not follow up or follow, follow their requirements of doing inspections every 6 months, which is just a very well known thing, quite frankly. So.
yeah, which is why um, I repeat that technology could be used effectively to constantly be checking for these kinds of issues. Not when our residents are reporting that there are concerns, those can be easily reported to us in a way that we can use the information to get back with the agencies that are responsible to them so that these things are not becoming outstanding matters in our district. And this is only one example of what takes place. I'm sure we've all heard of buildings that have gone without gas for many, many months. Unfortunately, um, the building that the Carrot Top at the north end of the district was in fell prey to that exact concern. And it was just so sad that after we, the community board, commended Renee Mancino for the work that she did in the community, one of her businesses had to be shuttered because of the fact that they were a bakery in a building that didn't have gas for over a year. And so just, the bakery is one issue, but what about the people that lived in that building and require gas in order to operate their families and their homes constructively? Um, and we didn't even know about it as a board, as community representatives. We had no idea that this was taking place, and that it just doesn't make sense because the data is all there. It is all in these portals available for us to use, but it doesn't make sense to think that all of us are going to be regularly checking into these systems to figure out what the needle in the haystack is when we actually we can build um, websites, apps that could do this work for us to let us know what it is we need to be paying attention to. And I think it's definitely a direction that we should move into. The quicker the better. So, and I will continue to follow up to see how I can restart that conversation, especially now that the Armory Matter has been voted on, and we should be able to move away from that concern as an immediate concern um, into this that clearly is a major issue.
So just to continue along with the other websites, I want to switch over here as well to the Zola website. This is a little bit more recent. I would also just recommend, it serves the very same purpose, but there's also a DOITT map for NYC. If you also just again type that into Google, first thing that pops up as well. The reason why I just wanted to show you all this is I guess considered to be a bit more user friendly. Also for anyone who works with Stata and also a lot of geographical kind of for instance ACRIS. Uh, it's very helpful for people to find all this information and also use it for other resources as well. When I've spoken in the past to Collins as well, he uses this regularly to try and find out what's going to be happening with each of one of the blocks. Um, as we understand, right, we're looking at a lot of these buildings that are supposed to be R7A. when we look at the areas that are supposed to be rezoned, right, we're now seeing that these are supposed to be, what is M1 intentionally supposed to be for either anywhere between what would only be light industrial manufacturing, or perhaps even a mixture of manufacturing as well as housing in some spaces. We're not necessarily talking about right here, but in some of these areas, they will be. And it's one other way that you can also look to see what's going on there. If you're concerned about perhaps there is work being done to elevate buildings in the future, I can imagine there might be that concern. Even within some of these R7A areas, you should be able to figure out just what exactly is allowed to actually occur on your block, right? You should be able to find out exactly whether or not your landlord is doing something that's illegal, whether or not they're supposed to be doing this sort of construction there. And it'll also offer you some additional information that DCP collects alongside with other agencies as well. And actually, this would probably be a good instance for me to mention, for instance, that property that we talked about earlier back last year, the space that actually burned down right by the Dykeman 1 train, and we were trying to figure out whether or not that could actually be used for affordable housing. By the way, just in case folks didn't hear, I did follow up with that owner. He did not choose to follow up with me. I spoke with the managing agent, and they said they would also speak to him. If he was interested, he would reach back on out, but unfortunately he did not. So, that's just one of the other areas you can also check to see if perhaps when this space is being developed on, what exactly can take place there. It should probably be, I think, on this very property lot.
2 questions, Ariel. Which owner are you referring to? And the second question is this the same building where they were proposing to put the train station hub for 181st Street?
Oh, no. This is here in Inwood. Sorry, this is off of Dykeman.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know why I thought we were lower in the district. Oh, I see. It's on 241 Sherman.
Oh, well, yeah, that's just my my home address, but this is another place now.
Okay.
This is where Myron Collins was talking about. There was a building that had burned down, and originally we wanted to try and see if there could actually be affordable housing being put there. Essentially, so more information, not necessarily as pertinent to this conversation about the Zola website, but essentially the owner was planning to sell the property and was at that time not willing to speak to anyone else. And I think, if that property lot gets sold, then maybe that new owner we can reach out to. But at that time, it was still in the hands of the original, and he was not willing to. So yeah, I think it's more so just something to also look at for any new developments that might come up. If that's the case, we know right away this is R72. What can be done on that R72 area? We know it's only supposed to be used for mixed residential and commercial buildings. So that's also, the other reason why I also want to present this website to everyone so that they know how they can use it. It's actually a lot more helpful for understanding just across our entire neighborhood what typically lots are really zoned for. It gives you a better understanding as to how much is really parkland, which is a very large portion in Inwood, as well as residential, commercial spaces, and a huge number of other things here. And I also just know, of course, because of the new zoning codes that we have going alongside the spaces that was particularly rezoned, those are going to implement a lot of opportunities for manufacturing that could very well lead to more jobs. We just are cautious, I would say, as to who will enter those spaces. Madruga, during the very early start of the rezoning, we're talking about having it being potentially shared as an Amazon. I think it was a manufacturing shop at one point. So given labor concerns there, that's just another issue for me to think about. But yeah, so it's just one way, again, you can look at what the zoning allows for at this time in the community. If there are no questions, I'll just go to the last one that I had specifically noted for everyone. As mentioned before, Checkbook NYC's website is one of the most, I think, important publicly available resources for everyone to understand how the city spends its money, how contracts are being dealt out, and really how the agencies are following up on these individual contracts that they dole out to individual organizations. Um, I have been personally just following along with a lot of projects that come up across the entire city through here. And it's especially, I think, important for just, again, what's going to be happening after the rezoning, what about economic development opportunities are going to be coming about, is to look over the MWBEs. We have probably heard more than the past decade how many issues arise with how much money actually gets doled out by the city to MWBEs. We're looking, for instance, at this blue tab right here. It is mentioning 94.3 billion. Only 1.8 billion is going to MWBEs, and that's a concern that also the comptroller has been raising, even with within his own internal office with the chief diversity officer as well, bringing out a number of reports about this. Just to kind of give you a very quick look at what you'll typically look at. Actually, let me do the advanced search. It's a little bit easier on that. So this is, for instance, where you can type in either whether it be from an agency specific that will dole out a contract to an organization, or just look at all city agencies and kind of break down what exactly you want to look at. I'm not going to break it down any further because I don't want to go too specific, but you can just check out each one on your own time as well. So for instance, if I wanted to check into, let's say, the community League of the Heights, right? Pops up. You're submitting your search there. And you can typically look at what their contracts are going to look like that they're getting from the city. Given your internet speed, this might take a lot quicker or a lot less time, more time, who knows?
Or if you have Spectrum specifically.
I do have Spectrum, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. Me too. I'm not excited about it.
Okay, just a little bit more.
I feel your pain, Ariel. That's how I was earlier. I unfortunately also have Spectrum.
Mm-hmm. They almost got kicked out of the state. I don't know what happened with that. I thought it was a good idea.
We can only hope for Verizon coming to help us all either lower the rates on the prices or a little bit better service.
Yeah.
So you're going to see right now, at least for Community League of the Heights, they have 454 contracts, or at least transactions they'll specify here. To kind of give a little bit more detail, when you look into each of the individual transactions, they would typically show you a contract ID number or only show you the document ID. It just depends on really what is shared by the agency. And it'll pop up down here normally. Yeah. So for that transaction, you'll see there's a tie of several dates in which then there was more specific information about what agencies were tied to that transaction. And this can just vary depending on what exactly is going on with that transaction. It looks like everything is mainly being used for educational and recreational programming for youth. If you wanted to click into more information, you could, but right then and there, you can see a bit of the kind of top overview numbers, the 72,000K that they're getting from DYCD for that, payments to delegate agencies. And it kind of just gives you a little bit more information here. And you can click on details if you really want to get into more specific items as well. But this is generally how, I mean, when I'm doing my own research about what's happening with the spending of individual contracts for organizations, this is what I'll typically do, especially when I have better internet. But yeah, it's really helpful for me to understand what exactly is going on, what agencies are spending their money on. Uh, mm, yeah. And you can individually go through each one. I mean, there's so many on the website that you'll find. But also it's good so that if ever you are wondering what services are being essentially offered contracts for, that maybe you did not even know are being offered to an organization to, let's say, service you in your community, this is where you can always check them. And I find it individually very helpful. So for instance, they're offering professional services, and they might have a consultant that's being brought in to help with this, whether it's for workforce development, training, helping people apply to jobs. Maybe they even might be doing headhunting, helping individuals find jobs that are specific to their interests, things like that. So, I mean, this is just a very brief overview. If you wanted, again, more information, you could break it down by the departments, the vendors. Thankfully, they do their own work, it seems like. They're not going through anyone else. Most are, or all of them are under $1 million. You can break it down by what's through expenses. And then, okay, so it's not here, but if they did have capital projects, they would also have a tab here that's also talking about capital. And thankfully they are considered an MWBE, so all are categorized as such. Okay. Does anyone have any specific questions about this? I know it's also new. So it's also just very helpful, even if at your own time you want to play around with this and just try and figure out what information is also available here. I would definitely recommend doing that when you have that chance. Okay. So those are the, again, 4 main websites that I wanted to point out for folks alongside with the tracker. So that if you have questions in the future about what is going on with a lot of the priority objectives, and you're talking about where HPD is sending this money, or the Housing Development Corporation is also sending its money to help with, let's say, the Pillars program, let's say the Affordable Cooperative program that they were talking about before, you can also probably check on some of those expenses here. And you just have to do a little bit of digging into each one of the transactions or the individual contracts that might get signed out by those agencies. There is, I guess it's a very quick thing for everyone to know. The New York State Joint Commission on Public Ethics, although it does not have the greatest history of public ethics by the media, it has this website where you can actually check as well individuals that are essentially serving either as a lobbyist or a representative of an organization that gets registered by the state of New York, as well as even with the state or the city of New York. So if you are being approached in the near future by various representatives of these organizations, you can always check here to find out if they're registered to be a lobbyist, if they're specifically meant to be representing an organization, before, let's say specifically a government agency such as we are. So these are things that you should also be able to look at in the near future. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I guess just for now, does anyone have any questions? I know it was definitely quite a bit of information being shared today. I definitely don't want you all to feel as if this is the only opportunity to ask questions, but these are just things that I think is very important just for anyone to try to kind of start getting a grasp on and learning a little bit more about how they can use it.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in to say in regards to the State Commission on Ethics, I think there's another portal as well that lists lobbying activity. I was very shocked to find during the Haven Plaza issue, that many board members, including myself, had been listed by Columbia University as having been lobbied for the purposes of the Haven Plaza. And even when the Inwood rezoning was taking place, pretty much the same. I feel like the borough president's office is remiss in not training us about exactly what that means, of what the rules and the ethics should be, so that we could be aware of when we are being approached for things, that those conversations may have a bigger goal for some of the people that are talking to us about the work that we do here on the board. Um, I just wanted to put that. I, for one, would like to learn more about exactly what those rules are.
Hmm.
Aisha, what was the name of the website you mentioned?
Adiel just had one of them up. There's
The joint
one.
ethics one. Okay.
Yeah, I have to find what the second one is.
Okay. I can do a probably quick Google search or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember too because I use that one more. It is, I think this is it. Yes. So it's through the office of the city clerk, and I think on Google, if you type in NYC lobbyist search, it pops up usually right away. I'll just share my screen so people can also see that too.
Yeah, I see lobbyist search public database, right? Yeah, that's what I have.
So you can also see, and you can break it down by individual lobbyists, perhaps even the client if they're hiring an individual lobbyist to appear. You can check on that, and also individual employees that could also be registered under an individual lobbyist, or even a lobbying organization, and checking which years that they might have appeared before an elected official, or perhaps an agency, things like that. You can kind of see just further breakdowns to who they might have appeared before or for what. So that's kind of just this is where I'll conclude with regards to the websites, the publicly available resources that you can definitely feel free to play a bit more around with. Again, I'll share these links so that you also can review them at your own time. We've kind of gone into the second item.
Excuse me, Ariel, before we leave this topic, I was wondering if Department of Buildings also captured information about commercial space within the buildings.
So Department of Buildings, they should have information stating whether it's like, residential only, or perhaps it's residential and commercial or mixed use specifically. But I don't think that's like where, like, if for instance, like, let's say you're talking about the bakery having those issues with their landlord, that would be where you'd find that information. But that is a good question, because maybe that could be shared publicly somewhere. And yeah, I'd be interested to see that too. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, so I think we've kind of like hit right upon what was going to be the next topic, is really just discussions on our future Housing and Human Services Committee objectives. I raised that we really need to try and go back at some point and connect with the city agencies that have been involved with the rezoning, and also putting forward a lot of the individual pet projects that are really discussed within the memorandum of understanding that was really brought out of the Deputy Mayor Glenn's office at that time, discussing what the city would commit to do so as to help both tenants either stay in their homes or tenants get new homes in the district. And so I think in the future, one of the main focuses for, I would say, myself would, or whoever is really at ever in the future on this committee, is to focus in on getting meetings with DCP, Department of City Planning, Department of Buildings, the Housing Preservation and Development agencies, uh, and even if possible, the comptroller. Because if they have that ability to pull all the information and show us, what spending has been done with regards to, let's say, the Neighborhood Pillars program, I would definitely love to be able to find out how they do that. Because it's one thing for us to also know, like, let's say this is XYZ is going to the Clough organization. If there's more money being spent outside of that organization, where's it going, right? And they might have that capacity to pull that information far better than any of us could, even with our fact check website. And I guess also following up on some of the concerns that were raised here as well, is maybe asking city agencies if there's a capacity to really find that information about commercial businesses. Because if, for instance, what happens with Carrot Top could happen with other, small local businesses here that could essentially be pushed out, right? Because if they don't have a necessary right to stay in the location and they're being pushed out and they already have a 5-year lease, that could lead to another small business closing a lot sooner, and quite frankly, experiencing harassment, even though there's not necessarily a clear understanding of what commercial business harassment might look like. Do others have any additional thoughts that might have been raised? I'm still aware of, quite frankly, also the ones that we put together this past year. So those can also be referred back to, but if there are additional thoughts as to what, we might have already gone over right now, I'm happy to also just make note of that.
I mean, I think to a point that was made earlier about the website on the where you can find information on inward rezoning being rather outdated, maybe just like an in-person update as to where we actually are with the various projects, considering that some of the information is outdated.
Yeah. And maybe even asking specifically if there's new timelines that might be assessed
Right.
for a lot of these projects too.
Yeah, I'm sure just the way that COVID impacted the updating of the website, I'm sure it has probably impacted the progress of some of these projects. So it would just be nice to hear from HPD or on how it's going.
I think that we need to be getting reporting on a lot more than just that. Like across the board, there's a need to have an understanding of exactly what's happening. An example of that I wanted to bring up tonight also is I've learned from many people, not just here in the city, but even going as far as upstate Rochester, where people who have vouchers are having an extremely difficult time renewing those vouchers for the apartments that they live in. And what's happening is it's pushing them into risk for homelessness. Some of what people are experiencing is that when they attempt to renew their voucher, or when they are not even, there's no communication or correspondence going out to them stating that their voucher is due to expire in some cases. And others, they know that it's supposed to expire. And when they attempt to communicate with the agency in order to do so, people are not in their offices because of COVID. People are working remotely. They can't get in touch with them. Emails are not responded to, and people are in court right now. The other issue that I'm seeing with those same situations is that because of COVID, even though they may have right to counsel or legal aid supporting them, they are not able to appear themselves personally in court. Many attorneys are representing them without their oversight in court, and basically just communicating back to them after the court date is happening. The problem with that is if someone in legal aid is misrepresenting information or does not getting the story right or not advocating appropriately, these tenants may not even know that that's the case. It's a major concern for me because I feel like definitely, I mean, we went over this, I think, in our last meeting, some of the impacts that we can expect from COVID. And I think that many people could end up in uh, court situations that could have been avoided if some of this agency side of things was happening differently, and then they don't even know. It's like a blackout in regards to the information across the board.
Maybe it actually would be something we could focus on, come September, where we ask Levine's office if they could send a representative over to just share with us if there has been an increase in funding for legal aid services in general. Because I do know that with the expansion of what is the right to counsel now happening across the entire city sooner, there also had to be an allocation of the budget to do that, because it was uh, as uh, as I mentioned a little while back, it was already very difficult for a lot of legal aid attorneys to keep up with the caseload at that time. So I can only imagine that there have to have been some allocation more of more funding for that purpose now.
Hmm. I think something should be done to mandate that if a housing case is happening for someone, um, that something should be done so that they could be in the loop, not just via reports from attorneys. Because unfortunately, I've seen over the years where some of these agencies, they have a very high volume caseload in many instances. People should be aware of what's happening in court. They should be able to either be present or see after the fact exactly what took place in court. I don't see why that couldn't be a possibility, but they shouldn't just be in the dark about what's happening. So
Yeah, I mean, it could be possible if Legal Aid Society had their own way of developing their kind of own database and an online website.
hmm.
It's just the courts are very outdated. But yeah, I completely hear that. Did others have also additional ideas that might have came up, or?
I don't know if it's still as relevant as back when I was with the state senator's office. I know that there were a lot of issues surrounding the HDFCs and the city attempting to foreclose on some of them. Is that still bubbling up? Is that still a prevalent issue that we know about? Where,
So
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, sorry, please don't let me interrupt.
Yeah, no, I just remember working with some of these HDFCs to stop the city from foreclosing on the property, and actually get them on the list for renovations, because we do have a pretty high concentration of them, don't we? Or that might be actually CB9, but I do know that we have a few in northern in 12.
Mhm. Yeah,
We
so
definitely have a few.
yeah, there has been issues with a lot of HDFCs. I think that they kind of slowed down with the foreclosures, at least on the city's end, because of the pandemic. But before the pandemic, that was a very big issue, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it was largely impacting a large swath within Brooklyn specifically, that had also been forced into tenant-in-term lease programs and third-party transfer programs. I have not been as familiar, quite frankly, though, with how things have gone since, and that is, yeah, that's definitely something I think we should all be following up on, in the coming CB12 year. Yeah, thank you for raising that. Actually,
Yeah. Yeah, because I can imagine with us coming out of the pandemic and the eviction moratorium is not going to be in place for forever. I can see this as an issue that might potentially bubble up again.
Sally, you had your hand raised.
Yes, I wonder if y'all are going to look at the privatization of NYCHA properties, since it seems to be happening with the rezoning in Inwood.
Yes. So just like very quickly, we were just discussing on the Inwood rezoning tracker for the mayor's office appointments, mayor's office of operations. Sorry, I'm at appointments. The operations office, they have individual projects that they've put a timeline on, but we haven't been hearing anything about. And so that's actually one of the items that we also want to follow up on as well.
Right.
But I'm glad to hear you also have the same concern there.
Yeah, and also the fact that with the Eliza not following any of our recommendations in terms of sizing of units, the promises they made and those calls that they were going to look at it in the future, how to hold them to those promises.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a few items with NYCHA.
Yeah.
Just to make note, Sally, because you're now we're just taking stock of individual items that members would like to discuss in the future for the coming year, and I'm just going to be making sure to compile them as well, and also just making sure that it's shared with everyone as well in the future.
Perfect. Then the other thing I would add to the list is seeing if there's a way that Housing and Human Services and Health and Environment don't have to meet on the same night.
Yeah, completely understood. Are there additional items? And don't worry, because I know the tracker is going to keep us very busy next year, so you don't have to make any more specific ones, but I just wanted to ask everyone about them. So if that is the individual items that just pique your interest right now, perfectly okay. We can leave this here. I guess for this agenda here, we can move on down to old business. If anyone has any to cite at this time. I guess the one thing I'll just make note of, I'm not sure if everyone saw the tallies that got sent out by OC, but if not, feel free to just reach on out to her. She's, I think, tried to send it to everyone for this past month's meeting. And so 2 out of the 3 passed. One was essentially the abstentions, and the no's essentially kept that one from passing. But
Which one? I didn't get that communication. Sorry.
okay.
Same.
Yeah. So it was the resolution that we had on the rank guidelines board, and then the second was the oversight resolution for the entire armory.
Okay. Yeah. So those 2 passed, and the third one failed. Okay.
Yeah.
Ariel,
Those
just
are
a quick
very close
question.
things. It was at one vote.
Quick question, Ariel. Did that email go out just to the executive committee, or did that go out to everyone?
I thought it had gone out because I know folks were asking about the vote, but I am happy to just try and.
Thanks, because I sometimes feel like I barely get any communication.
I
feel
left off.
You and I are on the same boat then, Marielle, because I think it might be newer members just might not be included in some listserv or some sort, because sometimes things happen
I
and
didn't
bubble up.
get it either.
Oh, you didn't get
I
it? Okay.
The issue is there's not really protocols for exactly how this should be happening. I think that whenever anything is passed or whatever happens with our resolutions, it's one of the reasons why I put forward the tracking resolution, which needs to be revisited now, is because there isn't enough reporting about the things that happen, the work that we do. We're not getting feedback about exactly how things are manifesting. And this is one example that we don't get a report of what's happening with the resos once they get voted on and what should be happening with them. Which brings the question, the agencies and representatives that resolution or those resolutions are going to go out to, have those been decided yet? Specifically for Washington Armory oversight.
Oh, sorry. You asked which elected officials? I just told the office to send them to everyone.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then which agencies are getting them, or which I guess institutions?
Well, I had them sent directly to the individual elected officials. I didn't request anything specific like for each agency. But I mean, they might have already been stamped and signed, but I can just request that Ebenezer sends them to both DSS and Parks.
DHS, Parks.
Just because DSS is over both. But yeah.
I would think that also the Department of Law that draws the contracts of how the building is governed, and possibly definitely the controller will receive it because they're an elected. But yeah, I think those are some of the agencies that definitely need to be added to the list.
Okay. Yeah, I can just request it.
Would you also not add the speaker of the city council, since y'all are asking specifically for the city council to take action? And I don't think he's typically on the list.
Yeah, I can request that. But I'll also check. I'll ask. Sorry, I'm blanking on names today. I'll ask Ebenezer when I reach out to him if the speaker was already on there. Yeah, and I have to find Rosie's email. But okay, yeah, I'll send that as soon as I find it, and yeah, I'll request that from Ebenezer too.
Oh, the other thing that I wanted to bring up, I'm not sure if the board got communications as far as I know that there was a meeting that was held in relation to the fire department. One of the things that I had tried to raise during one of the general meetings is that the concern of fires happening in the district, and that some of them are definitely related to the daisy chain dynamic of, plugging up extension cord to extension cord, because of the fact that in many of our pre-war buildings, we only have single outlets in some rooms. I'm sitting in a room right now that has a single outlet in it. It's 2021. People have many devices and appliances. So it puts you at risk because you have to live the 2021 lifestyle. But the current law, according to code enforcement of the Department of Buildings, which I communicated to previously, does not require older landlords to do the same as a new landlord would have to in regards to what the code is of adding a certain amount of outlets or even bringing the electrical up to speed. I installed a fixture. Well, I didn't install it. My ex-boyfriend installed a fixture in my house. And when he attempted to do so, the wires actually deteriorated in his hands when he was attempting to put the fixture up. Those are all fire hazards. So I was wondering if we got any information about what happened with that meeting. I'll follow up with Curtis to see what the status of that is, but I think that's something that should also be added to our list of concerns to look into. Is maybe the legislation needs to be changed as far as what the code is requiring of landlords, old and new.
Yeah, and I remember that was one of the items from last year. So yeah, that's still on our list of to-dos, I guess.
Aisha, just really quickly on that, there was something that the Public Safety Committee held a couple of months ago. I can't recall.
I think that
And they
was
did invite one of the local kind of, firehouses. I don't know. My words are escaping me this evening, but they were there, and that was also one of the topics they spoke about, which was that, because I also have that same concern. I live in a kind of a pre-war building, and also, with one outlet, and it's hard. So is it that you're referring to, or something separate?
Yeah, so I didn't get to see that meeting. I would assume that the recording exists. I'll try to look for that.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it, and I'll send it to you, because I sat in on that, and because I had questions about that exact question as well. And that's, they told me the exact same thing that you just mentioned, that in pre-war buildings, they're not required to add new outlets and so on and so forth, which I think is a bit ridiculous, but anyway.
Yeah, seemingly it all comes down to money, but it's putting people's lives at risk. So
certainly.
Is there any other notes on old business? New business. Don't worry, we're getting there. All right, if there's no business, I am happy to motion to close this meeting, but I will just say Have a wonderful summer. This is our last meeting, and can't wait to see you all or hear from you all soon. Can I get a second?
A second.
Thank you, everybody.
And I am calling this meeting to a close at 9 p.m. Have a wonderful summer, everyone.
You
Have a
also.
good summer.
All right.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Carol.
God bless.